Niamh.
Thanks very much. This is really interesting and very provocative talk. When you say, though, that what you're doing, amongst other things, is for the European Commission to enforce the rules, an awful lot of the responsibility for the political and the economic mess we find ourselves in, you devote to Germany. But the idea that the European Commission would enforce the rules as an independent political actor seems to me to be decidedly implausible. You then went on to say that that the Eurozone institutions are dysfunctional, the rules are lopsided, and that the decision makers are in effect bullied by Germany. Well, since we find that the Greeks discovered that a change in government can't change the politics that they have to deal with at a central level, can you see any other political way forward that involves some means of altering preferences within Germany when Germany is the dominant decision maker politically close to the US as a whole?
That's a very good question. I mean, the first thing is the European Commission is able to at least set out that Germany is in breach of the macroeconomic imbalance rules. Of course, the Eurogroup is able to overrule that decision, as indeed the predecessor to it did with the fiscal rules in 2003-04. So it's not clear that would work, but it's still, the European Commission has basically internalized the constraint and said, well, rather than throw the book at Germany, we are going to simply say that the current account surplus is not a problem, or at least not one that needs any action doing. And I think that it would create greater political pressure on Germany to act. You're right, though, I think the political pressure needs to come in part from within Germany. It's depressing when you speak to many people in Germany who you think would be sympathetic to these kind of views, that they've kind of internalized a worldview that actually isn't to their advantage. You can imagine that unions saying at a time of high unemployment, we're going to accept wage restraint in order to increase employment. That's a perfectly reasonable bargain that a union that took a broader perspective would take. The idea that you'd accept a corporatist model where basically workers get screwed and have continually been screwed is surprising. And you can see Germans, the figures on real wages in Germany are really striking. Or likewise, there's beginning to be a debate about increased investment of Germany. Marcel Fratscher, who's close to Cyril Gabriel, written a book about it. And potentially the refugee crisis becomes a Keynesian stimulus in disguise, because it's going to require higher fiscal spending in the short term. Ultimately, though, I think that Germany is very set in its ways. It associates its post-war economic success with ordoliberalism, and the idea that it's going to accept a different policy framework at the European level at the time when it's the most powerful country in Europe, I find unlikely. So when the French or the Italians say, well, the way to solve all this is to create a fiscal union and some kind of fiscal government which would be able, in effect, to cage German power, but more politely to pursue more sensible macroeconomic policies at a Eurozone level, I say there's no chance in hell of that happening, which is why I've suggested that the way round this is to decentralize fiscal decisions again. So you say, if we return to the no bailout rule and we make it credible, first of all by creating a sovereign debt restructuring mechanism, and second of all by limiting banks' holding of sovereign debt so that actually it's credible that could be used, then Germany can no longer argue that it has liability for other people's debts. And if you don't have liability, you don't have control. That's the ordoliberal principle. No liability, no control. Therefore, we don't have, there's no justification, at least philosophically, for having ever tighter constraints on what other governments can do. And so you could have a CDU government in Germany deciding not to invest in its future, and you could have a French government, socialist government, deciding that it does want to invest, and the two would be perfectly compatible.